The cowboy's boots struck the dusty main street with a steady rhythm, spurs clinking softly as he moved past the rows of wooden storefronts and hitching posts. Women leaned on porches and rocked in chairs, their eyes following him as he passed. Some waved shyly, some straightened their bonnets, and others whispered behind lace-gloved hands, but he gave them nothing more than the tilt of his hat and a glance as sharp and fleeting as lightning on the horizon. He was a man who had walked too far, seen too much, and carried in his stride the weight of every mile of wilderness behind him. His heart was armor, his gaze set only forward, until the moment it wasn't. The saloon doors swung in the wind, music spilling out, laughter trailing after, but still he didn't stop. A seamstress outside the tailor's shop offered him a smile sweet as fresh bread, her eyes lingering on the curve of his jaw, but he walked on without pause. The schoolteacher, prim and proper, brushed dust from her skirts and gave him a nod of approval, yet his boots didn't falter. He was a shadow passing through their lives, untouchable, unreachable, a man with no tether to the world of soft hands and easy smiles. And then, at the far end of the street, she stepped into view, and everything in him, the steadiness, the detachment, the steel that kept him moving, came to a sudden, jarring stop. She wasn't dressed like the others. No silks, no frills, no lace to catch the eye. She wore a plain skirt faded from the sun, boots scuffed from work, and a shawl wrapped carelessly against the wind. But it was her presence, not her clothes, that rooted him to the ground. She moved with a quiet strength, her back straight, her chin lifted, eyes sharp as glass but softened by some sorrow that lingered beneath. She didn't look at him like the others had, with hunger or hope, she barely looked at him at all. And it was that indifference, that quiet fire smoldering beneath her stillness, that struck him deeper than any bullet ever had. For the first time in years, his breath caught in his chest. His boots felt heavy, the dust settling around them as though the earth itself demanded he stand still. She brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, turned toward the general store, and in that simple motion the cowboy felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Every mile of road behind him, every face he had forgotten, every moment he had thought himself untouchable, all of it crumbled in the wake of her presence. She was no ordinary woman. She was gravity itself, and he was powerless against the pull. The women nearby noticed the change. The seamstress frowned, the schoolteacher's lips pursed, and even the saloon girls leaning on the balcony exchanged sharp glances. They had never seen a man like him pause for anyone, never seen his stride broken or his eyes softened. Yet here he stood, his hat tilted low, his gaze locked on a woman who seemed unaware of the stir she had caused. The town itself seemed to hush, the air hanging heavy, as though waiting to see what this lone rider would do next. She reached the store steps, her hand brushing the rail worn smooth by years of use. He watched the way her fingers lingered, how her shoulders rose and fell with a quiet breath, and something about that small gesture told him she had carried weight heavier than most men could endure. He knew the signs, loss, hardship, survival carved into her every motion. She was not fragile. She was not waiting to be chosen. She had already chosen herself, and that made her more dangerous, more irresistible, than any beauty draped in ribbons. His heart, a thing he had long believed buried beneath dust and gunpowder, gave a single, painful thump. He almost laughed at himself, at the absurdity of it, one look, one moment. And he was undone. Yet there it was, undeniable as the horizon. His hands flexed at his sides, restless, and for the first time in years he felt the urge to speak not with a gun or a cold nod, but with words meant for something more than passing through. The cowboy shifted his weight, boots creaking, and took a step forward. He told himself it was nothing, just curiosity, just another face in a long trail of faces. But his body betrayed him, moving with a pull stronger than reason. He had walked past every woman in town, untouched, unmoved, a shadow drifting through sunlight. Yet now, as she pushed open the door to the general store, he felt a fear unlike any he had known, the fear of being seen, truly seen, and perhaps found wanting. She disappeared inside, the door swinging shut behind her, and still he stood rooted in place, staring as if the building itself had swallowed the only truth he'd ever stumbled upon. His throat tightened. He reached up, thumb brushing the brim of his hat, as though steadying himself against a wind no one else could feel. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered what his pride refused to admit: he was already hers, though she hadn't so much as spared him a glance. And with that realization, the cowboy took another step, then another, his boots dragging him not by choice but by fate toward the store where she had vanished. He didn't know her name, her story, or her heart, but he knew this much: his journey, as long and lonely as it had been, had led him to this moment, to her. And for the first time in a lifetime of walking, he was ready to stop. The bell above the general store door jingled softly as he stepped inside, the sound sharp against the quiet that seemed to settle around him. The room smelled of pine soap, dried tobacco, and fresh flour, the shelves stacked with goods hauled across miles of desert and plain. Behind the counter, the shopkeeper gave him a quick nod, but the cowboy barely noticed. His eyes had already found her. She stood near the shelves of fabric and thread, fingers tracing over a roll of faded calico as though measuring not just the cloth but the memory it might one day hold. She looked up only briefly when the door closed, then returned to her task, unaffected, while every part of him seemed to draw tighter, caught in the simple gravity of her presence. He had been in stores like this across 100 towns, and never once had he cared what anyone inside was doing. But now, his gaze followed her as if the world had narrowed to the space she occupied. Her movements were unhurried, sure, and it struck him that she did not carry herself like a woman waiting to be noticed. She was her own, complete, steady, almost untouchable. And that, more than beauty or grace, rooted him deeper to the floor than any barbed wire snare ever could. The shopkeeper cleared his throat, waiting for the cowboy's order. He didn't answer. Instead, he took off his hat, turning it slowly in his roughened hands, as though the simple act might give him time to think of words that wouldn't sound foolish. He had faced gun barrels, storms, and hunger without flinching, but now, staring at the curve of her cheek in the lamplight, he felt more like a boy than a man carved by the trail. His silence stretched, awkward in its weight, until finally he forced himself to step forward, each footfall echoing too loud in the small store. She glanced up at him then, really looked this time. Her eyes, the color of storm clouds before rain, met his with a calm so sharp it cut. It wasn't surprise, nor interest, but something steadier, a measuring look, as though she were deciding whether he was a man to acknowledge or dismiss. He felt his chest tighten beneath that gaze. All the women who had smiled, who had whispered, who had tried to catch him with charms, none of them had made him feel half as small, half as raw, as this single, unflinching glance. Her voice came quiet but firm when she finally spoke. "You're blocking the light." He blinked, startled, realizing he had stepped too close to the window where she stood. He muttered a quick apology, shifting aside, but the sound of his own voice seemed strange to his ears, rougher than usual, stripped of its practiced indifference. She returned to the fabric, smoothing it with her palm, and the air felt charged, as if even the dust motes hanging in the sunbeam paused to watch. The shopkeeper busied himself with his ledger, clearly aware of the quiet storm gathering but wise enough not to step into it. The cowboy lingered by the shelf, his hand brushing over a coil of rope, though his eyes never left her. He wanted to speak again, to ask her name, to say something, anything, that would tether this moment so it wouldn't vanish like smoke. But his tongue betrayed him, the words stuck like burrs in dry grass. All he managed was a rough, "That one's a strong weave," nodding toward the calico she held, as if the strength of cloth mattered compared to the strength of the woman who examined it. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper, almost amused. "I wasn't asking your opinion," she said, her tone cool but not cruel. And in that moment, he knew she had already seen through him. She recognized what others never had, that behind his silence and hard edges, there was a man still searching, still unsettled. She turned back to the counter, placing the cloth down, and he felt the sting of dismissal like a lash. Yet instead of pushing him away, it pulled him in deeper, binding him with invisible cords. He stepped closer again, slower this time, his voice steadier though low. "No, you weren't, but I gave it anyway." She looked at him again, and this time her gaze lingered, if only for a heartbeat. Something unreadable passed between them, challenge, perhaps, or recognition. He felt it in his bones, a spark flaring into something that could not be ignored. The world outside could collapse, the saloon burn, the town scatter to dust, and still that single look would remain seared into him. The silence grew thick once more, but it was no longer awkward. It was heavy with possibility, with the unspoken promise that whatever path his boots had carried him down until now, it had led him here for a reason. He straightened, his hat still in his hands, and for the first time in his life, he did not feel like a man passing through. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something vast, dangerous, and irreversible. When she finally turned away, gathering her purchase and moving toward the door, he followed without meaning to. Not to chase, not to corner, but because the pull between them was too strong to fight. Outside, the sun dipped lower, the sky bleeding into hues of gold and crimson, and he knew that whatever happened next, he could no longer walk past her as he had every other woman in town. His stride, his silence, his armor, all of it had been broken. And he wasn't sure he wanted to mend it.